The pulsing Earth. Did you know that the Earth has a heartbeat? Scientists have identified a bizarre signal coming from somewhere on the planet that pulses every 26 seconds. The groundbreaking discovery has stumped the scientific community for the past 50 years since it was first noticed. Every 26 seconds, a pulse emerges from the planet, detected by seismometers across the globe. It's an incredible phenomenon that nobody seems able to solve. In the 1960s, geologist Jack Oliver at Columbia University noticed a blip on his seismograms. He then traced the source of the mystery blip to somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Jack monitored the blip, confirming that it comes every 26 seconds. And he was surprised to see that in the summer months, the blip is a tad stronger. This was the first time that somebody was able to record the heartbeat of the planet. In the years since, plenty of researchers have confirmed Jack's original findings. As technology has advanced, more sophisticated seismic machines have been used to analyze the data. In 2006, researchers at the University of Colorado pinpointed the exact source of the pulse. The planetary heartbeat is coming from the Gulf of Guinea, located off the coast of West Africa near the small island of São Tomé. Scientists know where the blip is coming from, but they still don't know what it is. There is no consensus among the scientists of the world, but there are a ton of guesses. Scientists have suggested that it could have something to do with ocean waves hitting the continental shelves. There could be an underwater feature creating a harmonic vibration that's felt across the world. But all these guesses fall short when you look at the unwavering facts of the pulse. Other than it being stronger during summer, it remains exactly the same. It's been pulsing every 26 seconds ever since Jack Oliver first identified it. Natural things on Earth don't tend to repeat with such machine precision for such a long amount of time. It's like the ticking of a clock. But what could it be? The derailment. In the summer of 2014, a train derailment saw the fuselages of Boeing 737 airplanes tumble down an embankment and into the Clark Fork River. It was one of the weirder train disasters in recent memory. The westbound train was on its way through Montana when it derailed, and it was carrying 6 plane sections when it jumped off the track. According to Boeing, the train was transporting the parts to its factories in Washington state. No one was injured, but the planes were ruined. Some people heading down the river in rafts found themselves at the epicenter of the disaster, paddling by as the fuselages steadily sank. That's something you usually have to pay extra for. By the end of the weekend, the operation had begun to remove the fuselages from the river. The 6 huge cylinders were then crushed and baled by the Pacific Steel and Recycling Company. They brought in a portable baler that's usually used to crush cars. Then they were transported to Pacific Steel's shredding plant near Boise, Idaho, to be disposed of. But they left behind some dramatic pictures. Treasure from World War II. In 2022, a fisherman discovered a piece of World War II history off the coast of New Jersey. The former National Guardsman, Randy Camp, was fishing for squid when he found an engine that may have belonged to one of the deadliest World War II fighter jets. Randy was out with fellow fisherman Jake Wiscott at the time of the discovery. They were pulling in their net when both of them realized they had something that likely wasn't a squid. The net was unusually heavy, as if they were pulling up a solid anvil, and when they got the net onto the ship, a machine tumbled out of it. Being a former National Guardsman, Randy knew exactly what he was looking at. The artifact was most definitely an aircraft engine, but he wasn't sure precisely which engine it was. So Randy reached out to the Naval Air Station Wildwood Aviation Museum. And with help from curator William LaSalle, the engine was identified as a Pratt & Whitney 18-cylinder R2800. The engine was installed in several different types of aircraft, like the Douglas DC-6, which was used in wildfire control and for transporting cargo. The engine was also used in the Northrop P-61 Black Widow fighter jet, as well as the seriously deadly Grumman F-6F Hellcat. The Hellcat was a vicious machine that was used to combat the Japanese Mitsubishi A-6M0 during the war in the Pacific. And considering that the engine appears to have been submerged for over 70 years, it was likely part of a Hellcat. New Jersey, but more specifically Cape May, was an important Navy stronghold in World War II. It was heavily defended because many feared that the Germans would attack with their submarines, or the Japanese would attack with their planes. There is no indication of how the Hellcat engine got lost in the sea, but surely it must have an epic story. The Ancient Slab. A group of scientists at the University of Haifa recently discovered a rare slab of stone. The mysterious stone, pulled from the bottom of the sea off the coast of Israel, is inscribed with the name of a forgotten Roman governor. A governor who led a devastatingly bloody campaign of carnage nearly 2,000 years ago. In the early part of the 2nd century AD, the wars between the Jewish people of Judea and the Roman Empire were reaching their conclusion. Rome had already conquered Judea, turning it into a Roman province. And although they kept it under their thumb, the Jewish people weren't particularly fond of being subjugated. Around the year 132 AD, the Bar Kokhba revolt erupted, and that's when the Jews in the Roman province rose up against their conquerors and fought back. It was guerrilla warfare in the Judean desert, Jewish rebels hid in caves striking at the Romans wherever they could, and these seemingly endless skirmishes resulted in a legendary figure being born. He was a warrior named Simeon bar Koseva. He was the ringleader of the rebels, helping to try and capture Jerusalem from the Romans. But as it turned out, the hero Simeon wasn't so different from the Romans. He proclaimed himself the Messiah of the Jews, then began punishing all those who didn't bow down before him. Simeon's fall to the dark side resulted in dissension among the Jewish people. The momentum they had built in their fight against the Romans was destroyed, and their rebellion was squashed. As a result, the Romans slaughtered them without mercy. Then the Romans wouldn't let the Jews bury their dead as part of their punishment. This whole chapter in the history of ancient Judea is marked with blood and treachery. Now let me get to the stone pulled out of the sea. The giant chunk of rock was found near the city of Haifa in an archaeological zone named Tel Dor. Archaeologists have found other things here in recent years, from scraps of pottery to lost anchors. Director of the underwater excavation, Dr. Asaf Yasur Landau, said that the stone has an inscription of the Roman governor's name who was active during the revolt. Historians had always known that there was somebody in charge of the Romans during that tumultuous time, but they never knew what his name was. The underwater stone, however, named him Gargilius Anticus. The reason nobody knew who the Roman governor of Judea was between 132 and 136 is simple. Immediately after the revolt, the Romans abolished the province of Judea. They also tried to erase any mention of its name from their history books. Judea was no more, and in its place was the united province of Syria-Palestine. Reef ball burials. Former dentistry professor Janet Hawk updated her will in 2020. At the age of 77 and a lover of all things oceanic, Janet wanted to become part of a coral reef upon her death. The less than ordinary request is something more and more people are asking for these days. When Janet dies, her cremated remains will be mixed into a concrete dome. Then she'll be dumped into an artificial reef as something known as a reef ball. Reefs across the world, but especially in Florida, are starting to be filled with concrete and human remains. But just what in the world is a reef ball, and how do you go about becoming part of a coral reef? Would you even want to be part of a coral reef when you die? Let me know in the comments. According to Florida-based charity Eternal Reefs, reef balls are all about giving back to the world by replenishing the tragically dying natural reef systems. Since the 1950s, between 50 and 75% of coral reefs across the world have gone extinct. Reef balls are perforated concrete bulbs that could help regulate entire stretches of the seabed. Each person's reef ball is marked with GPS coordinates, which are then given to family and friends. It's a little bit harder than driving to the cemetery, but a visit to an underwater grave isn't impossible. People can dive down to the reef ball, where the deceased person's ashes have given new hope to marine life. This isn't even that new of an idea. People have been returning their bodies to the sea since the days of ancient Egypt. In South Pacific cultures, a person's body would be placed in a canoe before being pushed out to sea. And throughout Asia, scattering ashes in the ocean has been practiced for thousands of years. Ocean burials are starting to become synonymous with eco-friendly alternatives to traditional burials. Cannonballs and Swords. In early November 2023, a mysterious collection of weaponry was announced, and it was recovered in South Carolina. Hundreds of relics from the Civil War were scooped out of the river during a mass cleanup. I'm talking about cannonballs, swords, and unexploded munitions. These incredible artifacts were found by crews removing scum from the Congaree River. The ancient weapons likely came from the ruthless campaign that was waged by Union General William T. Sherman. Sherman is one of the most notorious figures of the Civil War. He was particularly harsh when it came to his policies, specifically his scorched earth policy. He was hailed as the most original genius in the American Civil War and the first true modern general. Sherman destroyed everything in his way, leaving nothing behind that his enemies might use to their advantage. In 1864, Sherman captured Atlanta. Then he went on a march from Georgia through the Carolinas, causing large-scale destruction. He burned both civilian and military infrastructure to the ground, leaving behind scorched earth. It was all part of his plot to stop the Confederacy from fighting, and soon enough they did. In April of 1865, William Sherman accepted the surrender of the Confederate armies in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. The cannonballs and swords found in the South Carolina River likely originated from Sherman's campaign at the end of the war. Archaeologists also uncovered bullets and a wheel from a wagon. Now, going forward, the war relics will be properly preserved and hopefully put on display at the South Carolina Confederate Relic Room and Military Museum. The eruption. Scientists in Greece have found evidence of an underwater volcanic eruption that was so powerful that if it happened today, the world as we know it could end. The previously unknown eruption occurred off the coast of Santorini. It was 6 times larger than the legendary Minoan eruption, believed to have helped collapse the Bronze Age world, though no human would have seen it because it happened over 520,000 years ago. The expedition was carried out by an underwater research vessel known as the JOIDES Resolution Science Operator. Scientists from the University of Athens were also involved in the program. They discovered evidence of an enormous pumice deposit, and by pumice, I mean volcanic rock. Scientists drew samples from 7 different locations around the island of Santorini, and all the samples told the same story. The ancient layer of volcanic rock came from an impossibly devastating eruption. There is no way to know how much life was lost because of the eruption, but considering the raw power of the underwater volcano, its effects would have been felt across the globe. The Minoan eruption, which as I mentioned was 6 times smaller, occurred 3,600 years ago. It was so intense that the Minoan civilization of Crete was practically wiped off the map. The much older volcanic eruption that was just identified has been compared to the Tonga eruption that occurred in January 2022. But still, scientists say that the Tonga eruption was about 10 times smaller. Mystery in Malibu. About 3 miles from the coastline of Ventura County, near Malibu and Los Angeles County, there is something extremely strange. 2,000 feet underneath the surface of the ocean is a geological formation. A formation that looks very unusual, and that some people believe could be an underwater alien base. The formation itself is enormous, stretching nearly 3 miles across and over 2 miles wide. Geologists believe that it's nothing but a natural formation. They even named it the Sycamore Knoll, when knoll means mound. But if you look at it hard enough, you'll notice that there is just something a little too perfect about the formation. It looks like an artificially constructed box, with a flat roof held up by support columns. In 2014, rumors started circulating in California about Sycamore Knoll and how it could be an underwater lair for extraterrestrials. UFO enthusiast Jimmy Church said in his podcast that it could be the biggest hub for UFO activity since Roswell. Coincidentally, the National UFO Reporting Center has reported incredibly high numbers of UFO sightings in the area. This suggests that there really could be alien ships discreetly coming and going, and if they can make it through the emptiness of space, they can certainly descend into the ocean with ease. Mainstream scientists like David Schwartz with the U.S. Geological Survey are having none of it. Schwartz said there is no proof that Sycamore Knoll is anything but entirely natural. What do you think? Alien base or just a huge sunken rock? The underwater city. In France, there is a miniature sunken city that most people have never heard of before. It's deep underwater, a tiny town that's been abandoned for nearly 60 years. It isn't ancient, but it certainly looks ancient. The miniature village is 100 feet underneath the French Riviera, originally built for use in a French movie. The watery town has no name. It's also miniature in the literal sense of the word. It has a church, a town square, a hairdresser, and a supermarket for all your shopping needs, although nobody's ever shopped here. After all, the supermarket isn't even big enough to hold a loaf of bread. It took 2 years to complete the construction of the miniature village just off the coast of La Formiguée Lighthouse. So, why would anyone spend so much time and money creating an obscure underwater town? Well, that's because it was meant to be used as the set for The Child and the Mermaid. The French musical started production in the middle of the 1960s, but the film was ultimately abandoned. Filming a whole movie underwater turned out to be a little bit too ambitious. The film was never completed, and the underwater set never needed to be used. But since nobody destroyed the village, it's still there in the French Riviera right now. And it's the only evidence left that the bizarre film almost existed. The Amazonian freak fish. Reports have been coming out of the Amazon rainforest of an intrepid fisherman who captured a very unusual creature. On a quiet morning, a local man went fishing just like he does every day. But what he reeled in was so crazy that it left him baffled and shocked the scientific community. It was an Amazon river fish unlike anything ever seen before. Even its shape defied classification. It looked sort of like an eel with an elongated body, but its dorsal fins were far more similar to the dorsal fins of something like a pufferfish. It also had an intricate pattern and bizarre coloration. The peculiar specimen intrigued the local community and sparked global interest. However, this is where the story ends. Nobody knows what kind of fish was captured that intrigued so many people. And truthfully, there aren't even any photographs to back up the story. Yet based on what scientists know about Amazonian fish, it's totally possible that a local caught something that nobody had ever seen before. The Amazon River Basin covers a whopping 2.5 million square miles and has over 2,500 known species of fish. Scientists have also estimated that there are over 1,000 new species of fish that haven't even been discovered yet. The fish of the Amazon are so incredibly diverse that it's hard to imagine they all live in the same place. The electric eel lives in the Amazon River, delivering a shock of 650 volts. The river is home to the arapaima, which grows to over 440 pounds and can headbutt a person's breath from their lungs. There are also stingrays, piranhas, and bull sharks, so who knows what else is out there. Aboriginal secrets in Australia. Off the coast of Western Australia, researchers have discovered a small trove of stone artifacts. The artifacts come from the deepest offshore Aboriginal site in the country. Investigations started off the Pilbara coast in 2019. That's when archaeologists identified stone relics from the days of prehistory at a depth of around 45 feet. Scientists from Flinders University were able to bring a few hundred artifacts up from the bottom of the ocean. These artifacts included stone tools, things like primitive axes, and grinding stones. During the investigation, researchers also found a secondary site, but they only uncovered one artifact from it, a single stone tool from 8,500 years ago. Scientists went back again recently to double-check the second site, hoping to find a few more pieces of the past. And sure enough, they uncovered 4 new artifacts. This allowed the scientists to confirm the site as an ancient place where indigenous Australians lived in the Stone Age. They were alive at a time when prehistoric beasts still roamed the globe. Archaeologist Chelsea Wiseman called it a significant discovery. She said that it confirms that people were living on the surface of what is now the bottom of the ocean. Just try to imagine how different the world must have looked in that era. This was an important settlement for indigenous people, and now it's completely underwater. One day in the future, coastal cities in the United States could suffer the same fate. Archaeologists could be finding pieces of New York City at the bottom of the ocean in 8,500 years. Finding a handful of stone tools might not sound particularly enthralling, but it certainly is for anthropologists. Chelsea Wiseman said that there could be thousands of other indigenous sites located offshore. These were people who thrived in sophisticated societies 9,000 years ago, thousands of years before the Egyptians or Mesopotamians ever existed. China's Yangtze Wreck. 2022 was an exciting year for Chinese archaeology. Over 600 artifacts were revealed following the salvage operation of China's biggest ancient wooden shipwreck. The shipwreck is amazing for a whole host of reasons. It's considered to be the best preserved piece of underwater wreckage found in the country. This one fact alone makes it an extremely important piece of Chinese heritage. But each of its artifacts tells its own story. According to the experts, the salvaged relics prove that China had a healthy trading relationship with the West. The shipwreck's artifacts show evidence that a maritime Silk Road existed. China wasn't isolated from the rest of the world. They traded with other ancient societies, helping China grow an impressive economy when Shanghai was a river port town. I know you're dying to know how old the shipwreck is, and you probably want to know its name as well. But you might be disappointed because the name of the ship is, as much as I hate to say it, super boring. They call it the Yangtze River Estuary No. 2, a name it received because it was the second ship of its kind to be discovered in the Yangtze River Estuary. It was active during the reign of the Tongji Emperor, who ruled during the later part of the Qing dynasty in the mid-1800s. The ship isn't as ancient as ancient Greece, but it's still archaic. It's been at the bottom of the river for nearly 200 years. The porcelain items recovered from the shipwreck show that Chinese artisans embraced Western styles and techniques. So there was, and always has been, a strong trading relationship between the East and the West. There's one more thing I want to mention, and that's the Nanhai No. 1 shipwreck. This shipwreck was discovered 35 years ago and is significantly older than the No. 2 shipwreck. It sank during the Song dynasty between 960 and 1279 AD. It might be a much older ship, but it was still used as part of a maritime trading route with the Western world. The city of Dolichiste. Partially submerged on Kekova Island in Turkey is the ruin of Dolichiste. I call it a ruin, but in truth, it's almost too pathetic to be called a ruin. You could do the backstroke right over the top of the ruins and not even realize you were swimming above an ancient city. The handful of stones and tiny foundations are all that remain of what was once an important trading hub in the Mediterranean. Dolichiste was home to a unique maritime culture that developed its own traditions, as so many island cultures do. They were sheltered from the outside world in a beautiful slice of Anatolia. They enjoyed warm weather and gorgeous blue water that is so clear you can admire tiny creatures moving through the sand between your toes. The island is located between the ancient port of Mira and other cities like Ximena and Apperley. Its strategic position allowed the inhabitants to not only develop a unique society, but also profit from sailing merchants. So, what happened to the mysterious islanders? That's the intriguing part. Although plenty of architectural remains have been discovered, and even some shipwrecks, There's not a lot of evidence to show why the city was abandoned. People likely lived on the island since the archaic days, all the way until the rise of the Byzantine Empire. It was occupied for many consecutive centuries, but then everyone abandoned the island and Dolichiste was submerged. The best guess scientists have today is that an earthquake hit the island. The city was likely submerged during a burst of tectonic activity, and it's not exactly a secret that the sea level was rising. Other cities suffered similar fates along the coastline of Turkey. The cities of Tristomon and the harbor of Myra were both partially submerged between the Roman and Byzantine periods. Epic mountains. In a mind-blowing new study from scientists at the University of Alabama, they have found mountains taller than Mount Everest. At least they think they have. Scientists found evidence of an ancient ocean floor wrapped around the core of planet Earth. And rising from the ancient ocean floor are mountains that could be taller than Everest in some areas. But this discovery goes way deeper than the bottom of the ocean. It goes to the bottom of the ocean beneath the bottom of the ocean. Researchers used incredible new technology to create a high-resolution map of the Earth's core. The technology revealed a thin but very dense layer hugging the core at a depth of about 1,800 miles beneath the surface. The layer is situated in a place called the core mantle boundary, where solid rocks touch the molten outer core of our humble little world. One of the geologists involved in the study is Samantha Hansen, and she was quoted saying that the interior structure of the planet is far more complicated than originally thought. To put it in extremely simple terms, the floor of an ocean that likely existed hundreds of millions of years ago is currently wrapped around the outer core, with mountains taller than Everest poking upward. Not just a little taller, but up to 5 times taller than Mount Everest. The bottom of the ocean might feel like the bottom of our world, but it goes so much deeper. And this discovery should give you a bit of perspective as to just how thick the planet is. Lakeside Albania. In Albania, at the bottom of Lake Ohrid, archaeologists have found something astounding. They've identified what could be the oldest lakeside settlement ever found in Europe, and this settlement dates back roughly 8,000 years. Lake Ohrid is a beautifully enchanting place. With its pristine green hills and old churches, it's a marvelous landscape that looks like something straight from a fairy tale. The lake borders northern Macedonia and Albania, and it's been occupied by humans since the dawn of humanity. It also hosted some of Europe's first sedentary communities. And by that, I mean the very first humans who realized they could build houses and chill out instead of always being on the hunt for food. Archaeologists have always known that the lake is important, but it wasn't until recently that they had the equipment and funding to prove it once and for all. They dove to the bottom of the lake, where they discovered a series of defense systems surrounding a prehistoric village. But forget the village. Check out the 100,000 wooden spikes that were found surrounding it. 3,500 years before the pyramids were built, a group of humans protected their society and their very families with a wall of spikes. I should also mention that the city wasn't underwater when it was built. Lake Ohrid was much smaller during the Stone Age. The village would have been positioned at the edge of the lake or slightly in the lake. The houses in the village were built on stilts, and these stilts would have kept the houses several feet above the surface, just like stilt houses in coastal fishing communities across much of modern Southeast Asia. As for population, this village was only home to around 500 people, but maybe as few as 200. Professor Albert Hafner from the Swiss University of Bern said that it appears to be the oldest lake-dwelling village to ever be discovered in Europe. What do you think life was like 8,000 years ago living in a stilt house on a lake? It's hard to even imagine these days. Sunken Yukon. In 2019, Canada's Yukon territory suffered from a severe drought. The drought caused the Yukon River in Whitehorse to fall dangerously low. And as the water shriveled and vanished, mysterious objects started being found in the riverbed. People walking along the edge of the vanishing river discovered pieces of rusty old junk that had historical significance. Most of what was discovered isn't worth much money, it's just historically interesting. Archaeologist Ty Hefner with the Yukon government discovered an old log cradle, once used to support stern-wheelers as they were hauled out of the river for the winter. Plenty of rusty old nails were found, along with wooden logs and planks. Iron fixtures from the days of the gold rush were also uncovered in the muddy gravel that used to be covered in water and ice. Hefner said there were so many wharves and warehouses here that it's no surprise their ruins are still around. Unfortunately, though, nobody really knows where the artifacts came from. A lot of the buildings that were constructed at the river's edge were burned down or destroyed without being properly documented. There are whole deposits of wood and steel that turned up because of the historically low river, but none of them have any known stories attached to them. These are all tangible pieces of the Yukon's past, so it's a shame that their origins are a mystery. Sunken town of Dunwich. This is the story of a remarkable British port town that was destroyed by a fearsome storm in the 13th century. The town's name is Dunwich, part myth and part reality. Dunwich is a real town that's still around today. Yet 700 years ago, a portion of it was destroyed, resulting in it being swallowed by the angry sea. Modern Dunwich is located between the seaside resort town of Southwold and the town of Aldeburgh. It isn't a very big place, so don't be worried if you've never heard of it. Only about 200 people call Dunwich home, and they have a single road that moves through their quiet town. There is a bed and breakfast for visiting tourists, along with a local museum. They have a cozy pub that makes you feel as if you've stepped back in time to the Middle Ages. There's a quiet gravel beach where you can find peace and tranquility. And finally, there's a ruined monastery. There's also a huge part of the village that's currently hidden under the sea. Dunwich is quiet and secluded today, but it was once one of the most important ports in the Middle Ages. It was almost as important as London, built on fishing, trade, and pilgrims. The Greyfriars Monastery was established in Dunwich in the 1250s, and it attracted religious patrons from across England. The town was on its way to becoming a true metropolis, but that all came to a screeching halt in 1286. A storm of biblical proportions swept along the coastline, blowing the monastery into the ocean, and many of the homes and structures were carried away by the rioting waves. Dunwich was undone by the storm, but it didn't go extinct. Late in the 13th century, a new monastery was built around half a mile from the edge of the sea. Nowadays, the sea is encroaching on the ruins of that monastery. It seems like the ocean is still bent on destroying Dunwich once and for all, if it takes another 1,000 years. In the decades following the disaster, stories began to spread. There were rumors that England's own Atlantis was submerged off the coast of Dunwich. People claimed that during very violent storms, you could hear the old church bells ringing in the wind. Modern experts believed that the old town of Dunwich was likely destroyed until very recently. Evidence started to emerge in the 1960s that the legendary ruins were still intact, just a few feet from the shore. Then, in 2008, Professor David Sear used a map from the 16th century to look at where old Dunwich would have been. After that, he took a boat out into the water, equipped with sonar, to scan the seabed. David managed to find the physical ruins of Dunwich on the seabed, exactly where they were supposed to be. So, England does have its own Atlantis. The city destroyed by a storm is still out there waiting to be explored.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Sunken Maya City. There is a fascinating and yet haunting place at the bottom of Central America's deepest lake. An international team of scientists with help from Mexico's National Anthropology and History Museum recently explored, mapped, and photographed the remnants of a lost Maya city called Samabaj. And it was no easy feat. The scientists had to dive 55 feet beneath Lake Atitlan, high up in the mountains of Guatemala. The mysterious sunken city of Samabaj was built by the Maya sometime around 400 BC. It then lasted for at least 650 years until 250 AD, when something unimaginable happened. This city was totally developed, densely populated, and filled with all the amenities the Maya had come to expect in their major centers. It had temples, domestic dwellings, great square plazas for gathering, and all on the shores of the greatest lake in the region. Well, kind of on the shores of the lake. The city wasn't actually built at the very edge of Lake Atitlan, since not even the Maya were crazy enough to do that. Instead, they built the city on an island inside the crater of the dead volcano, with its last major eruption being roughly 84,000 years ago. Shortly after they built the city, there was some kind of volcanic disturbance that caused the lake bed to shift and push the water level up dramatically. In a very short time, the city of Samabach went from being a floating island to being at the bottom of the lake. It was abandoned forever and only discovered recently by archaeologists looking to explore its secrets. Cleopatras Sphinx. Frank Gaudio is a French marine archaeologist, arguably the most famous marine archaeologist in the world. He is responsible for discovering the lost city of Heraklion that sunk off the coast of Egypt in 1999. Well, he didn't technically discover it, but he was the first to explore it. It was actually a commander with the Royal Air Force who first witnessed the ruins under the water back in 1933. However, nobody really had the technology or the desire to start exploring underwater ruins until 1999. Once they did start exploring, everything they found was fantastic. In fact, one of the very first things that Frank lifted out of the water near the sunken city was a gigantic granite sphinx. And not just any granite sphinx either, but one with the head of Cleopatra's father. As you may recall, Cleopatra was the very last ruler of Egypt before her death in 30 BC and Egypt's ultimate submission to Rome. Cleopatra's father was the great ruler Ptolemy XII, and they both had lavish apartments right here off the coast of Alexandria. Heraklion was a kind of island city floating in Abu Qir Bay off the coast of Alexandria, likely a place where royals and wealthy folks lived. But after Cleopatra's death, the city was shaken by earthquakes, hit with tsunamis, and then drowned because of the rising sea level. By the 2nd century BC, all of Heraklion had been swallowed by the bay as the soil liquefied. The wreckage of the Yamato. One of the most spectacular discoveries ever made in the water happened back in 1985. It was actually the summer of that year when a salvage team announced the discovery of a fantastic wreckage in the East China Sea. They came across the remains of what was the biggest Japanese battleship in all of World War II. It was called the Yamato, and it sank while fighting a desperate battle to turn the tides of war in the favor of the Japanese. When it was discovered, the Yamato was in pretty rough shape. The Japan Broadcasting Corporation televised images of twisted metal, the calibers of massive guns, and the rapidly disintegrating hull. In its prime, the Yamato was an absolute beast of engineering. It was 72,800 tons, the biggest ever built for its day. It was meant to be unsinkable, but lasted for 5 years. It launched on August 9, 1940, and could shell an enemy at 25 miles away with its 9 guns. Its sister ship, the Musashi, was sunk by U.S. carrier planes at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944, and then the Yamato was destroyed at the Battle of Okinawa in April of 1945. Out of over 3,300 crew on board, only 260 survived the horrific onslaught. These days, there is very little left of Yamato's glory. Because it was blown apart so effectively, its pieces were scattered across the sea floor. It looks more like a section of some underwater scrapyard than the remains of one of the most powerful ships that ever sailed the seas. The Java Sea Shipwreck. The Java Sea Shipwreck was found off the coast of Indonesia back in 1996 by some fishermen. The wreckage is 800 years old and still being studied to this day as one of the most important Southeast Asian wreckage sites that exist. The ship sank near the end of the 13th century off the west coast of Sumatra in the open sea. It's currently at the bottom of a major shipping lane, one that's been used since the earliest days of commercial trade in Asia. How in the world did this gigantic ship, over 90 feet long, become a pile of broken timbers on the bottom of the sea? Researchers believe it could have been overwhelmed by a storm. According to UNESCO, the ship was never covered over with any kind of sediment, and so it suffered massive biological degeneration. Nothing remains except a handful of timber fragments and some of its cargo. But the ship's cargo is actually the best part. After a lot of dives down to the shipwreck, researchers have identified Chinese iron and ceramics, wares from Thailand, products from Sumatra, and a total of over 100,000 ceramic objects. The ship was most likely sailing from Indonesia to China and making stops along the way to drop off and pick things up, only to be attacked by a storm and sunk. The rare phantom jellyfish. Scientists off the coast of California recently captured remarkable footage of an insanely rare jellyfish. The jellyfish is a massive and yet somehow almost impossible creature to spot. It was first identified back in 1899 and has only been filmed approximately 9 times since then. Out of the thousands upon thousands of dives done by professional scientists in Monterey Bay, it's almost never been seen. The super rare phantom jellyfish is a deep-sea jellyfish that lives between 3,200 and 21,900 feet deep. This is a place called the Twilight Zone, where very little light reaches the creatures who live in it. For this reason, the animals have developed all kinds of bizarre traits. Many of them are eyeless, some use bioluminescence to see, and others use the darkness to their advantage to slip around stealthily. It can grow to about 32 feet long and has a gigantic bell on its top nearly 3.5 feet in width. The creature is kind of bizarre because it doesn't have tentacles like an octopus, instead using 4 long arms that almost look like torn curtain drapes. Scientists aren't even sure how these things hunt. Would you rather discover a new aquatic species while scuba diving, or stumble across the ruins of an undiscovered ancient civilization? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots of videos coming up. Real-life lake monster. In Vermont's Lake Champlain, a very real prehistoric lake monster was just discovered washed up on shore. The monster is a gigantic sturgeon, a species that was previously declared endangered by the state. According to Chet McKenzie, a fisheries biologist with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, the sturgeon was nearly 7 feet long. The size of the fish makes it one of the biggest sturgeon ever to be seen in modern times. That's pretty impressive for Lake Champlain, especially when you know more about this spectacular marine monster. The sturgeon has been living on Earth since the days of the dinosaurs. They have armored scales, are practically indestructible, and have adapted very well to living at the bottom of lakes. They are actually considered bottom feeders and hang out by themselves, slurping up gunk and slime and whatever else they can find in the muck. Unfortunately for the sturgeon, they were considered a nuisance by commercial fishermen for the past century or two, and because of that, they were widely and indiscriminately slaughtered, and now there aren't very many of them left. So, finding such gigantic sturgeon somewhere like Lake Champlain is actually quite a big deal, and could mean their numbers are finally recovering. Sunken Egyptian fortress. In the Old Kingdom of Egypt, Sneferu, who's believed to be the founding father of the 4th dynasty, founded the city of Buhen. It started its life as a small trading post, and then was abandoned 200 years later. The city was little more than a blip on historical radar. It wouldn't be until the 12th dynasty that Senusret III went on several military campaigns against the Nubians to the south and the Kingdom of Kush. To maintain military superiority, Senusret III built a series of fortifications along the Nile. One of them was built in the abandoned settlement of Buhen. It was then the northernmost fortress in the chain, at the very edge of the Nile's bank. Its main purpose was to protect the commercial shipping moving in and out of the region from the rebel Nubians. A small town formed within its huge walls. The city was protected by over 1,000 soldiers and trained archers, and even the great Queen Hatshepsut built a temple within the fortress dedicated to the god Horus. Even through the years, Buhen remained a powerful fortress and imposing symbol of Egyptian military might. This is where things get a little strange. When it comes to sunken cities, most of them sank a long time ago, but in the case of Buhen, we watched it happen in real time. When the Aswan High Dam was constructed in 1958, UNESCO sounded the warning bells that many historical monuments and places would be submerged. There ended up being a huge international effort to move archaeological treasures out of the area. The Temple of Horus was completely dismantled and is currently in the National Museum of Sudan. But Buhen itself is gone, totally submerged as of 1964, sitting at the bottom of Lake Nasser. The Orient. The French ship the Orient boasted an impressive 118 guns and was the flagship of the French fleet way back in 1798. It was the lead vessel during the Battle of the Nile, when the British Royal Navy fought against the French Republic in Egypt. This battle was immensely important to history, as it involved Napoleon Bonaparte essentially trying to take over the world, and the British trying to stop him. Luckily, the British came out victorious, and Napoleon's defeat in Egypt in 1798 led directly to his humiliating defeat at the Siege of Acre in 1799. But let's get back to the boat, which was originally launched in 1791 under the name Dauphin Royal. She was renamed after the founding of the French First Republic the year after, fought at the Battle of Genoa in 1795, and later was renamed a third time by Napoleon Bonaparte himself, finally getting the name the Orient. In the end, the ship never made it out of Egypt. It was set on fire during the fighting and exploded in a great fireball before sinking into the water. And, surprise, surprise, 200 years later, almost exactly, the great French marine archaeologist Frank Gaudiot discovered the site of the Orient. He and his team documented the wreckage for the first time in modern history, and even brought back old coins, small weapons, printing type from a printing press, and a bunch of random possessions from the crew members. Ancient fishing canoe. In Wisconsin, a canoe was pulled out of the water, which was a pretty big deal considering the canoe is about 1,200 years old. For the first time since it was lost at the bottom of Lake Mendota, the artifact has finally seen the light of day. At Spring Harbor Beach, it was excavated by the Wisconsin Historical Society, together with local neighbors, a team of divers, and a bunch of enthusiastic history buffs. According to the Historical Society, the canoe was most likely built around the year 850. It's the only one of its kind still fully intact, and is an absolutely unprecedented discovery as claimed by archaeologist Amy Roseborough. It was interestingly found by a diver testing scuba equipment totally by accident. They came across the canoe 30 feet beneath the water. As for who built the amazing artifact, it was most likely one of the ancestors of the Ho-Chunk Nation Native Americans. However, historians are still working with local tribes to figure out how it was built and how it ended up at the bottom of the lake. The USS Spiegel Grove. The USS Spiegel Grove launched on November 10, 1955. She was a Thomaston-class dock landing ship who mainly participated in training exercises. She did a tour in the Mediterranean with the 6th Fleet, operating along the eastern seaboard, and transported Army troops here and there around the world. She also did a goodwill tour to the African coast, but really never engaged in any kind of action. In 1989, the vessel was transferred to the Mothball Fleet, and 10 years later, it was given to Florida, and they sank it. Florida didn't sink it accidentally, but chose to turn it into an artificial reef. It went down off the coast of Florida on May 17, 2002, and that was when the horror started. There was a string of deaths surrounding the sunken ship starting just a year after it was sunk on purpose. In April of 2003, Eunice LaSala died after diving Spiegel Grove, and in April of 2005, Tariq Khair Eldin passed away after diving in the area as well. The same thing happened in 2006 to David Hargis, and then to a group of 3 divers in March of 2007 who all reportedly drowned. And the deaths go on, making this haunted landing ship one of the most dangerous places to go diving in America.
Haunted Maya Underworld. A team of specialists in Mexico recently discovered some human bones at the bottom of an ancient sinkhole or cenote. These specialists are underwater archaeologists, professionals who put on scuba suits and descend into the darkest depths of Mexico's haunted cenotes in search of lost history, and sometimes the remains of human sacrifices. A cenote is an underwater cave full of water where often the ceiling has caved in, creating a natural underwater well sometimes open to the sky. Now they are popular places to swim in the jungle, but back when the Maya ruled Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, sinkholes were sacred spaces, viewed as entrances to the underworld. Archaeologist Bradley Russell and his team spent 2 weeks poking through the mud at the bottom of the cenote. The only way to get there was by rappelling down 40 feet deep into the earth. That's a little deeper than the height of a telephone pole. They went sliding down among huge stalactites on the ceiling and then dropped into the water below. Located just outside the ruins of Mayapan, near the modern city of Medina, this area was a major political center for the Maya between 1150 and 1450. There were at least 17,000 residents, with the city safe behind tall stone walls. Dr. Russell believes it was the leaders of Mayapan who built their city next to the natural cenote on purpose. They then used the sacred place to offer up souls to the gods by sacrificing people and dropping them into the underworld. So far, the team has identified 10 skulls in this chamber alone, with more likely waiting to be discovered among the rocks and sediments. The Dried Mermaid. Off the coast of the Japanese island of Shikoku, a fisherman allegedly captured a mermaid sometime between 1736 and 1741. This mermaid was a creature very much unlike the Western image of mermaids. It's a part human, part fish, part monkey mixture called a ningiyo. In Japanese folklore, it was said that if you could catch one of these horrifying mermaids and eat its flesh, you could gain immortality. There's even a story about one of these creatures appearing to the legendary Prince Shotoku in the 7th century at Lake Biwa near Kyoto. According to legend, the mermaid asked the prince to build a temple to display its disturbing remains as a way to remind people about how important life is. According to legend, he had once been an ordinary fisherman, but he was caught fishing in sacred waters, and he got transformed into the freakish creature. Interestingly enough, the shrine is real. It's the Tenshu Kaiosha Shrine, currently guarded by Shinto priests. Inside the shrine are the mummified remains of the mermaid that Prince Shotoku encountered 1,400 years ago. And yes, it really has been there for that long. Scientists aren't allowed to touch it, so we don't really know what the creature is, although most experts believe it was probably bits and pieces of different animals sewn together to look like a monster. Mystery tracks. The Great Blue Hole in Belize, according to legend, contains a terrifying monster. This monster is said to date all the way back to the Maya, who told stories about the mysterious beast and how it prowled deep in the bottomless depths of the Blue Hole. The Great Blue Hole is essentially the mother of all sinkholes. It's an enormous underwater sinkhole off the coast of Belize that is so deep it's hard to believe. The Great Blue Hole is a limestone cave system, and before it was drowned by the melting of the polar ice caps 14,000 years ago, it used to be on dry land. Now the Blue Hole is a very famous diving spot, but it is very dangerous. It's believed to have the highest diving fatalities in the world, with an estimated death of 130 to 200 divers in recent years. In December 2018, a team of specialists went to the bottom of the hole in a small submarine. 410 feet down, they came across the unimaginable. There, on the sand at the very bottom of this mysterious hole in the ocean, they found tracks. Researchers didn't immediately know if it was some kind of gargantuan underwater beast or if it was something a little less supernatural. They were shocked to find any sign of life at all down in that dead place. After a while, scientists found the answer. According to the chief submarine pilot on the expedition, Erica Bergman, the tracks were actually left by conches. It's pretty common for conches to fall over the edge of the Blue Hole, and since they can't climb up such steep walls, they eventually suffocate. They wander around for a bit and then die from asphyxiation. It's because at the bottom of the largest sinkhole in the world, there is no oxygen at all. It's an anoxic environment, meaning there's no way to breathe. There are no life forms down here because they have no oxygen, which was why the tracks were so shocking in the first place. Creepy shipwreck. There is an ancient shipwreck located in the Mediterranean off the coast of Israel. Of course, there are hundreds of shipwrecks, even thousands in the Mediterranean Sea, but this one has come under the scrutiny of students at the University of Haifa. It's called the Ma'agan Mikhail B shipwreck, and it's full of artifacts, and also skeletons of rats. 1,400 years ago, the ship crashed into the sand and sank about 230 feet off the coast, landing at a pretty shallow depth of only 10 feet. Because it was so close to the shore, it ended up being mostly covered in sand. This left the ship in an excellent state of preservation. Its timbers, the mast step, and its cargo are all very well preserved. Turns out that the largest maritime cargo load of Byzantine ceramics was found inside this ship. Alongside the jugs and bowls, the researchers also found evidence of walnuts from Turkey and the famous ancient fish sauce called garum. But archaeologists also found something a little strange. They discovered the preserved skeletons of rats. Many experts believe it was rats traveling from place to place on ships, just like this one, that caused the Black Death in the 14th century. These may not have been carrying that disease, but they were almost definitely a nuisance to the crew. And there were a lot of them. There were almost no other biological remains discovered except for hundreds of rat bones. According to what the researchers told Business Insider, that makes this the oldest evidence of a rat infestation on a ship in the Mediterranean. Disturbing, but a fascinating historical first. Sharkano. NASA has documented something very scary under the water. They found proof not of a sharknado, but of a sharkano. In the deep water off the coast of the Solomon Islands, there lies the Cavachi volcano. An expedition in 2015 dubbed it the Sharkano after they found sharks actually living inside the volcano. And just recently, NASA captured satellite images of it erupting. A Sharkano eruption! Not only can NASA see into space, but they can also see into our oceans. They use the Earth Observatory's Operation Land Imager 2 to see inside the volcano as it blew its top. A huge plume of discolored water, a great rumble through the nearby islands, but no sharks flying through the air. The sharks don't actually stick around when the volcano erupts, which it does pretty frequently. Instead, they live inside of it when it's calm because they like the heat. The volcano is about 65 feet under the surface of the ocean, and when it's not busy shaking the earth and creating small, ephemeral islands from its eruptions, sharks can be seen swimming around in its open top. Scientists have been watching them since 2015, and to be fair, these sharks are pretty clever. They can feel when the volcano is about to unleash some serious fury, and they swim somewhere else until things calm down. Then they move back into the volcano where the water is toasty warm. These sharks are basically lounging in their own underwater hot tub. Shout out time! Big thank you to Cypher76 and Shakia for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. HMS Arabis artifacts. Underwater archaeologists with Parks Canada discovered over 350 artifacts during their latest investigation of the HMS Arabis. This ship sank off the coast of Nunavut in the middle of the 19th century during one of the biggest expedition disasters in British history. The famed Captain John Franklin led the expedition in search of the Northwest Passage, but everything seemed to go wrong. The team got stuck in the Arctic, the HMS Terror and the HMS Arabis were frozen in ice, and the explorers had to try and make it back to civilization on foot. None of them made it, with all of them dying from a mixture of starvation, exposure to the elements, and even cannibalism. Both ships were discovered between 2014 and 2016 by Canadian archaeologists in the snow and under the ice in the water. But it was just recently that the team could finally get inside the HMS Arabis and start pulling artifacts out. It took them 3 weeks between August and September, with over 93 dives being made at about 110 hours underwater altogether. They found mostly personal items, things like a hairbrush, a lieutenant's uniform, ceramic dishes, wine bottles, navigational instruments, a jar of mustard, and even an accordion. The underwater tomb. About 7,000 years ago, a group of indigenous people living in what is now Florida decided to use a shallow pond as a burial site. Archaeologists say these people sank the bodies to the bottom of the water, then marked the burials with wooden stakes. The sticks would have poked out of the shallow pond. All these years later, the shoreline has moved quite a bit. The pond was originally way up the shore, about 9 feet above sea level. But as of June 2016, it was 20 feet beneath the surface. That little pond has become part of the ocean. And so when divers from Tampa were hunting for fossils, they accidentally came upon a human jawbone. Since the first bone was found, more excavations have been done looking for the rest of the bodies. Experts have now uncovered the burial stakes, which were entirely covered by sediment. They also found more graves, with many of the corpses in relatively good condition, thanks to the peat they'd been buried in. Instead of their bones decaying and being eaten by sea creatures, they remained somewhat preserved. Self-destructive octopus colonies. A team of scientists was looking at a rocky patch of terrain at the bottom of the ocean when they saw something remarkable. 100 miles from the coast of Costa Rica, on a section of the seafloor about 2 miles beneath the surface, the scientists found a colony of octopuses. These octopuses were living on a rocky outcrop of hardened lava, put there by an underwater volcano. But that's not the weirdest part of the discovery. According to the Field Museum's Janet Voigt, who helped use these submersible vehicles to explore the rocky outcrop, the octopuses shouldn't even have been there. They had not expected to find octopuses here, since these creatures almost always live in cold water. The thing about an octopus is that its metabolism requires more oxygen than what can be found in warm water. It was like finding a group of penguins on a tropical beach. Still, that's not even the creepiest part. The weirdest thing was that the octopuses were almost all mothers. Each one was guarding her very own clutch of eggs. And this is where things get disturbing. Scientists observed the octopus mothers in extreme states of stress. None of their eggs were even developing, and the octopuses were freaking out because of the warm water. Basically, they were all dying, which was a pretty horrific thing to see. These octopuses traveled here on purpose, decided it was a nice place to hatch their eggs, and then died long, excruciating deaths from the stress of being in water that was too warm, while all of their eggs died as well. Pablo's sunken airplane. The Staniel Cay plane wreckage is in the shallow water of Norman's Cay in the Bahamas. It was used back in the 1980s by Pablo Escobar's crew for transporting cocaine from Colombia to the United States. The plane is in pretty rough shape these days, a World War II-era machine that had been repurposed for drug smuggling. But as you can tell, because it's sitting under several feet of water, things didn't go so well for the plane. It landed short of the runway in 1980, hit a sandbar, and never moved again. Nobody was injured that we know of, and whatever powdery cargo may have been in the hold was promptly removed. However, the plane remains exactly as it was at the time of the crash, a grim reminder of Pablo's reign of terror during the first days of the war on drugs. In case you were hoping to see this fantastic piece of history on your next trip to the Bahamas, think again. As of 2021, not a single commercial flight was going to Norman's Cay. The only way to get there is by booking a very expensive charter flight. Deep sea crown jelly. Scientists have discovered a brand new species of creepy jellyfish. It's not the scariest animal that's ever been found, but it's definitely one of the weirder ones. Plus, it happened recently, about halfway through 2022. The newly discovered species is a deep-sea crown jelly, a resident in the midnight zone. That's the part of the ocean where very little light reaches, and where the animals are exceptionally odd. What makes this particular jellyfish so weird is its color. Its bell is scarlet red, and it has one tentacle, which is significantly longer than all the other ones. It almost looks like a coagulated clump of blood with a bunch of thin worms hanging off of it, just floating through the ocean. Researchers with the Monterey Bay Aquarium named the fascinating new species Atolla reynoldsi, after a man named Jeff Reynolds, one of the volunteers at the aquarium. In case you were wondering, it's not an entirely new genus of jellyfish. It's an Atolla jellyfish, which can be found all throughout the world, but there are only 10 recognized species of the genus. Scientists believe there are more of these creepy, blood-colored jellies hiding in Monterey Bay at depths of up to nearly 11,000 feet, but they haven't been able to officially identify them yet. Thanks for watching! Which deep-sea creature creeps you out the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon for more amazing underwater mysteries. Bye!